So after we took care of the basic level problems that was very apparent once we opened a drum kit in the mix, let's start by removing some of the clutter that's interfering with understanding what's going on and trying to make the fundamentals of the drum kit more apparent and clear. And what I mean by clutter is all these different channels and microphones are a very unnatural way of recording the drum kit. When we hear a drum kit in the room, we have just two ears. We don't have an ear right on the floor tom or an ear right on the hi-hat. We hear the whole thing as one complete unit. And as recording technology is advanced and we have the ability to have our ear on the snare and have our ear on the tom, we're starting to hear not just the very good quality of the close mic recording, but we also hear all these artifacts, noise, low frequencies, high frequencies, and we're also running into level balance issues. So the first thing we want to do is remove as much information as we can and keep just the very basics. So one of the things I like to do is remove a lot of the close mics on some of the drums and keep just what's essential for the main groove and the main feel of the instrument. And then slowly add all these other tracks to create, the full drum kit mix. So in this case, I'm going to start by muting, first of all, the close miking of the cymbals. Why am I going to mute those? Let's hear the hi-hat as an individual track. You can hear that on its own, it's really out of context. A hi-hat is supposed to be something in the background and more in the flow of the instrument, but on its own, the hi-hat channel is extremely unrelated and we can't really understand what the groove is from this track. Let's mute it for now. Same thing goes for the ride microphone. Now the ride microphone, especially if you're not playing the ride, it sounds like background noise. But then once in a while, when a crash is hit around that mic, it's out there. Let's hear that crash again. So it blasts us with volume out of nowhere in the context of the drum kit. Let's play it with that microphone in there. So the crash sounds completely out of balance. By muting it, we can eliminate that. So those are the first problems we want to take care of. The second problem is the tom microphones. The tom microphones contain a lot of information that's really important when the tom is being played, but they also contain a lot of information that's not important when the tom is not being played. Let me explain. Let's hear this floor track, for example. So you can hear that this track not just adds room sounds from every piece of the drum kit, like hi-hat, snares, and everything, it also adds a lot of low-end information that's really cluttering our sound. This is a pretty clean recording, but you can still kind of hear it. Let me bring it a little bit up with EQ so it's a bit more obvious. It's almost like a tone that's being added from the drum as other drums are being played. So every time the drummer plays a bass drum or a snare, the tom rings a little bit. And that would happen acoustically in a room, but in a room we would never hear it because we'd never be that close to the drum. But here in this context, it just clutters up the sound and takes away from the definition. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute it while I'm listening to the basic tracks. Same thing goes for the tom. Another track we may want to mute just while we're listening is some of the duplicated or double tracks for some of the main channels. So for example, I have two microphones of the bass drum. I have the bass drum in, that sounds like this, which is just a microphone inside the bass drum. And I have a microphone that's a bit more farther away. consider this microphone as much fuller sound, but it also has a lot of the other drums into it, and it creates, again, clutter, noise, room sounds, etc. Stuff we don't want to have when we're just listening and understanding the sound of the drum kit. So I'm going to mute that. Same thing goes for the snare. Now, if I'm going to listen to the top microphone of my snare, you can see that it gets a very full sound, which is the majority of the sound we usually want from the snare. However, the snare bottom microphone not just adds the net of the snare, it also adds everything under the sun, because the snare itself vibrates while the drummer plays. The bass drum, the toms, and almost anything else. So it adds this vibration, which is not that important to the main sound of the drum kit. Let's mute that. Same thing goes for my bottom microphone of my second snare. Let's play this kit right away as it is. Already cleaner. Now, the next step that we want to do is lower all the overhead mics. We do that because, just as we did for the toms, hi-hats, and all that, they add all this information that's not supposed to be in our faces. The overheads are supposed to add the balance of the drum kit. They're supposed to give us maybe the cymbals or maybe the highs of the entire kit, but they're not supposed to be so much in your face. So I'm just going to lower them. I'm going to keep them in the mix, but just lower them so that we hear the basics of what's going on. So I'm going to go to each of those channels and just lower the volume of each of those. So already we have a kit that sounds a bit more like a kit. We can now listen to the song and get the fundamentals of the song. If I add more instruments to this, it's going to sound way more natural than it did before with all these microphones. That does not mean we don't need those microphones. We absolutely need them, but we're going to build them as we move along.